Welcome to Film in 5D, the show about everything film with the 5D Mark II. I'm your host, Aaron Hammock, and this week we switch things up a little bit as I give you an introduction to some of the Photoshop techniques I use.
But Aaron, I thought Photoshop was not for video.
Yes, Colton, it is not. Actually, you can edit video in Photoshop. We talked about that in a previous episode.
Yeah, I just do that one too.
Oh, thanks. Nice little promotion right there. I've always been fascinated with Photoshop. To me, it's one of those programs that you can never completely master. There's always something new or a faster and more efficient way to get the job done. Not to mention, they've been releasing new versions every few years. Having said that, I know the focus of the show thus far has been exclusively film related, but I definitely think the skills you learn in Photoshop will go a long way, and photography in general is something that when you learn and understand, it can definitely help refine your skills as a filmmaker. To be honest, I'm still working to improve these skills on a daily basis, so it's my goal to pass on what I've learned to you guys as I'm learning it, so bear with me. Our first episode will be covering some of the basics and an overall scope of what you can and cannot expect from a program like Photoshop. You know that saying, fix it in post? Well, that's a saying that I personally live by. I know there are arguments both ways, but in my personal opinion, if you're working alone or in a small group on a minimal budget, you can't always afford to get the perfect shot straight out of the camera. Now, I'm not saying that this shouldn't be your goal. I'm just saying that you shouldn't be afraid to utilize some of the incredible tools we have available to us these days, especially to help correct our mistakes in post. One of the biggest factors when it comes to photographers who are just starting out is exposure. If you underexpose or overexpose an image, even if very slightly, you lose a significant amount of professionalism in your work. Now, of course, shot composition is another significant factor, one which I talked about at length in this episode. However, when it comes to the content within a frame, i.e. the mise-en-scène, this is not really a learnable skill. You either have an eye for photography or you don't. However, you can indeed improve a shot composition and even exposure in post, which I'll show you here in a minute. But first, I want to show you how I organize my photos. If you're doing weekly gigs and shooting hundreds if not thousands of photos each day, it can be a bit cumbersome to sort through them all. This is where I turn to Adobe Bridge even before I open Photoshop. Now, I'm sure there are several programs out there that do what I'm about to show you, and perhaps some that do it even better. But I use Bridge primarily for two reasons. One, it comes with Photoshop, and two, it dynamically links directly to Photoshop, saving you loads of time. So, while on Bridge, navigate to where the photos are you'll be working on, and before you start anything, make a folder and label it Good Shots. Then click on the View tab and select Review Mode. In this mode, hitting the left and right arrows will shuffle through your previews of the different photos. Hitting the down arrow will remove that particular photo from your view. Doing this will not delete your photos in any way, shape, or form. All you're essentially doing is deselecting the photos. This is just a more visual way of doing things that is also faster in my opinion. Once you've selected the photos you wish to edit, go ahead and press Escape to return to the main area of Bridge. Once you've selected your photos to be edited, go ahead and click drag them into the folder you created earlier. From here, we're going to work with these one at a time for simplicity's sake, but you can of course just select them all at once as well. Okay, so here's where we kind of take a left-hand turn. I said that we'd be showing you some tricks in Photoshop today, which isn't exactly the case. We're going to be sticking within Bridge and Camera Raw today. Now, what is Camera Raw, you might ask? Camera Raw is the best kept secret of the Photoshop program, as it's been coming with the full version for years, yet most people still don't even know about it. Now, personally, I use Camera Raw whenever I'm just making simple changes, like red eye removal, cropping, or simple color effects, mainly because it's just faster to work through Camera Raw than it is to work through Photoshop, especially since Photoshop is a much more robust program. Though the main reason I turn to Camera Raw over Photoshop is that I shoot in RAW most of the time. Many of you watching the show have DSLRs of one form or another, and the cool thing about most new DSLRs is that they shoot RAW, or a combination of RAW and JPEG. Now, if you decide to shoot RAW, it's a known fact that you'll be spending a great deal more time in post editing your photos, which isn't ideal for everyone's workflow. But if you decide to shoot in both RAW and JPEG, you give yourself the failsafe of a larger and more robust image file to work with in post. The awesome thing about shooting in RAW is that it helps to preserve the highlights and the shadows for you to bring back in post. This way you don't have to perfectly expose every image every time, which when first starting out and having the pressure to take hundreds of pictures isn't always possible. Heading back into Bridge, you'll see that I've selected a few different photos to edit, but notice some of them have a strange file extension. .cr2 is the extension of RAW photographs on Canon DSLRs. I've already gone ahead and selected the RAW files for the images that I felt weren't exposed correctly the first time around. Click on the circular shaped button near the top of the window. This will take us into Camera Raw. Once in Camera Raw, our first order of business will be to recover any highlights or blacks lost while taking photos because of under or overexposure. Now, it's important to note that any and everything we do in Camera Raw is actually non-destructive. Now, what that means is that the changes you make will not be baked into the image and can be changed at any time. Kind of like what I was talking about with adjustment layers in Photoshop or the audio effects rack in Audition 2 weeks ago. So here we have an overexposed image. A lot of details missing in the highlights, as can be seen in the histogram at the top right. Well, we should be able to recover most of this information by simply dragging the whites to -100. There. Now we have a much flatter image to then grade in Photoshop. Let's try the same thing with an underexposed image. Now, this image isn't super underexposed, but let's just say I want to recover some of the information in the background or something. Just drag the black somewhere between 0 and 100 and voila, a nice flat image that we can now grade in Photoshop. So that's how you can save raw photos in post. Now, the general rule of thumb is that if you shoot raw, you can adjust the exposure of an image by up to 2 full stops. Push it any more than that though, and you'll start running into some problems. But moving on, Camera Raw is not only good for saving images, it also has most of the corrective or stylistic features you'd find in Photoshop. And depending on your workflow, Camera Raw will probably end up working faster for you than Photoshop. In fact, I think the red eye reduction tool in Camera Raw works so much better than one in Photoshop. But I'll show you guys that in a future episode. The last thing I actually wanted to mention will dramatically improve your final composition. The crop tool is particularly useful in Camera Raw. Yes, it kind of works like the one found in Photoshop, but I think this version is much easier to mess around with and correct your mistakes before deciding on the final crop. DSLRs have become so powerful these days, but so many people don't realize how they can use them to their advantage. For instance, my 5D Mark II outputs 21 megapixel pictures, which is crazy big, bigger than anything I've ever used for the internet. So use this incredible size to crop and better improve the composition of your images. You can shoot an image with the idea in mind that you'll crop later. This way, you can effectively get 2 to 3 image compositions out of a single shot. Camera Raw also has several different presets that you can use to quickly frame your pictures for a default size for print. Once you have the framing you like, hit enter and the image will instantly resize. But wait, what if you suddenly change your mind and want a different framing? Well, rather than starting over, you can just hit C and reframe your image and of course, rinse and repeat. But that's it for this week. Let me know what you think about me doing more Photoshop tutorials in the future and if you think it would help you with filmmaking in general in the comments section below. Send me any questions to our Twitter page at twitter.com/filmin5d or post them on our Facebook wall at this link here. We'll be back next week, hopefully with some more creative content.
What happened to all that work we put into that debate thing?
Oh, dude, that was gonna be so good.
Like, what happened?
Yeah, so we didn't have any content last week because apparently I'm stupid and didn't check our audio files to make sure that they were the right ones. And then I went and got some software to try to recover the files and we could only get a portion of them. So we lost all the voiceovers, all of our good audio. We still had the bad audio, but we didn't have any voiceovers, so I just decided not to release it. And I want to release it still, but I want to redo it, but what can I say? It's too late now. There's a debate, political debate, Barack Obama, Mitt Romney. It was pretty funny. Guess who I was? Barack Obama, baby. Yeah. Mm-hmm. See you next week.
First, I'd like to say thank you, Stu. And to everyone here who has supported us in this great American city of Chicago. And who has shown us so much enthusiasm and respect throughout this entire campaign. And to you, Governor, I'd like to say thank you for joining me on what is sure to be my campaign to victory.
So we start off with less restrictions on the private sector. The middle class is struggling. Big Bird? Out. Middle-income taxpayers have been buried over the past 4 years. With my plan, money will literally grow on trees. Did you know I have 5 boys? Don't you think I know a little bit about women's equality when it comes to the workforce?
So, with that said, let's move on to the first question. Mr. President, Governor Romney, what are your proposed economic plans?
Well, actually, Stu, why don't you let me have the first crack at this? My economic plan is simple. It's so simple it can be boiled down into 5 words. Steal from the rich, give to the poor.
Mr. President, that is 8 words.